Meeting at the forbidden crossroads of discussion, this is where politics and religion intersect on the Sophie Scholl Society. I'm Mel McGinnis, and with me is Garrett Kang. And like I said, this is the time where we discuss those two forbidden subjects of religion and politics, along the lines of what Sophie Scholl did in Nazi Germany with her and her friends as they discussed theology, philosophy, and said, we need to see how this will work out in the realm of the public square. And for them, they met the guillotine because of their views. We here in America can still share what our thoughts are and be able to express them freely, especially as a presidential election is approaching. Not just presidential, but also congressional, Senate, House of Representatives, and other state and local offices. Garrett, as you're thinking about Tuesday, do you know who you're going to vote for president?
I do, Mel, and it's Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen of the Libertarian Party ticket in New York. Since I live in New York, this wasn't that difficult of a decision. New York has gone deep blue since I've been able to vote, and even before that, Reagan was the last Republican president to carry New York State. And it's an all-or-nothing state, as most states, except for a handful, are. Whoever wins, regardless of the margin, gets all the electors for that state. If I lived in Pennsylvania, I would definitely have to do a little bit more prayer and soul searching in respect to that, my vote for president. In our party in New York, which I think is the fastest growing party in the state, and we represent a lot of what the classic Republican and conservative parties before they got overly infected with progressivism represented. Smaller government, individual rights, property rights, deregulation, and freedom of the market to do its thing uninterfered by government. And I think we hold out, or we represent hope for positive change locally and in the state. And we need the votes to maintain our ballot access, since there were some recent changes by the Cuomo administration to make it harder for third parties to keep their ballot access, which is a big it makes it easier to run candidates locally and at the state level, and that's a huge advantage. If we lose that, it'll set us back quite a ways. So that influenced my decision. Jorgensen is not my favorite candidate that's ever been run by the Libertarian Party. She has some flaws. I didn't vote for her. I was a delegate to the national convention, but I think even with her flaws, I'm going to give them my support just to keep our momentum locally and in the state.
It's interesting because I've thought twice about voting for Trump. Given like what you say, we're here in New York State, it's deep blue already, and given the shenanigans from Albany to bump third party out of the New York scene of politics, I said, well, man, maybe I should consider trying that libertarian vote because for our state, I want that access to the ballot given to those third parties. Yeah. But I probably will end up voting for President Trump.
Well, you're a member of the Conservative Party, Mel, and I think you folks will get it. You still need to get that third party thing,
true.
But you've essentially, since Pat Buchanan ran, have just rubber stamped the presidential or the Republican presidential candidate. So as long as, and I think it usually does happen historically, you guys have met this new threshold the last however many election cycles since Buchanan ran on your line. So I think you'll make it. I would say if you're going to vote for Trump, vote for him on the conservative line instead of the Republican line.
Well, that's what I typically do. I go conservative to let the Republicans know we don't want moderate Republicans. We don't want neoconservative Republicans either. We want to have that traditional understanding of what conservatism is about.
Have you looked at all into Don Blankenship? He's running on the Constitutionalist Party, or the Constitution Party.
Yeah.
But they're not on the ballot in New York State, and I don't even know if they made it on the ballot in enough states to theoretically have a chance of getting the electoral votes. But I listened to an interview he was on with Larry Sharp, and Sharp's good about bringing in folks like that, and I really liked what Blankenship had to say.
Yeah, I would go Constitution Party. In fact, one year they were on the New York ballot, and I voted that way. And one year I wrote it in.
Yeah.
I can't remember who the candidate was. It might have been Baldwin. But I did that one time because I just could not pull the lever for George Bush or John McCain or Romney. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I hear you. And the way I see this going is that if Trump doesn't win this time, or say he does and finishes out 4 years, especially if he loses this election, I don't see the Republicans staying with that outsider mentality. I think they'll go right back to the centrist. My prediction would be the next cycle, if they lose this, Jeb Bush will be their nominee. They'll go right back to that squishy centrist philosophy.
Unfortunately, and two, you go to that philosophy, it just seems like there's more warmongering that happens.
A lot of hawks in that lane.
I'm sorry you saw it with George Sr., you saw it with George G.W., and you saw it, I think, in the platform or the way in which McCain would discuss foreign policy. Mm-hmm. Like you say, there's war hawks there, and I don't want any more war.
No. That's the thing, as a Christian, I go down the line of the law, the Ten Commandments, and I see so many being violated by our huge government now, regardless of who's in power. And, these useless wars are by proxy violating thou shalt not murder. Mm-hmm. A couple weeks ago, during your message in church, you came really close to saying taxation is theft, which is our libertarian mantra, but that's the biggest one, besides idolatry, which is what we've built this whole government system into, as a giant idol, and then we all have to fight every 4 years of who gets to stand on top of that idol in terms of the two major parties. I think the theft one is probably the most violated besides idolatry.
Oh, I agree. And I'm very clear about saying taxation is theft, because the way it's done now with this progressive income tax, and I feel the way it's done now with property tax, it steals what people own. And I just cannot buy into a system where if you own property, you have to pay rent to the government. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see those third parties, especially those freedom-minded third parties, have more pull and sway as to what's done in Albany as well as in Washington. Well, with that said, I found something that I was totally frustrated with. As much as I'm thinking of conservative Republicans that are voting for Biden as oxymoronic, yet even more oxymoronic is seeing evangelicals vote for Biden.
Oh, yeah.
That just blows my mind.
Yep.
How can you do that? And to say you're pro-life voting for Biden.
Yeah, I was going to say, the murder by proxy via useless foreign wars is one bad thing, but our government under, both parties, but at least the Republicans speak lip service to pro-life, where the Democrats don't even try. That's just murder, not by proxy. That's direct. Yeah,
and why is a Democrat who claims to be pro-life in the Democrat Party? Because they don't have a voice whatsoever. And two, it was interesting reading an article by John Piper, really well-known pastor throughout the United States, saying that he is not voting for Biden, of course, but he's not voting for Trump. And I can understand that point of view. For example, like you're voting libertarian. I can understand that as a Christian, though I wish libertarians were more anti-abortion.
Mm-hmm, me too.
But I can understand that vote. What I can't understand are evangelicals who say they're pro-life, anti-abortion, voting for Joe Biden.
So did Piper declare who he was going to vote for? He just said neither of the two major parties?
None of the two, but it seemed to suggest that he's going to vote for a third-party candidate, but didn't say explicitly.
I'd be interested to see if he reveals that.
I know, it will be.
Where is his citizenship in the U.S.?
I think he's from Minnesota.
Okay, and I don't know what their are they a swing or are they?
They could be, yeah.
I think they're in. I think they've been shifting over the years.
I think they're in the ballpark this
Yeah,
election. Yeah.
that's interesting because if you really understand how the electoral college works and the voting demographics of your state, sometimes it's easy, to vote for a third party, even if you really don't want one of the other major parties to win. Like, out of the two, gun to my head, it's an easy decision. Like, Trump is going to be better on the issues that I care about, at least on paper. Maybe not as much on practice. But yeah, it'd be interesting to get someone's perspective in a swing state, in a similar situation.
Right. And Piper said he couldn't vote for Trump because basically of his character.
Yeah,
his character was so flawed that he's boastful, he's facetious, he insults people. But it's interesting. A theologian, Wayne Grudem, took him to task in a very polite way. And he set forth 3 points that I'd just like to mention. And Grudem said this: there is a difference between the personal influence of a leader's personal example, which may be rejected, but laws compel obedience. In other words, he's saying, if you have Biden in there and Harris, they are going to strangle religious freedom. What about those corporations that operate by a Christian principle regarding the aspect of abortion in healthcare? Like we saw with Hobby Lobby. Having Biden and Harris, they'll want to force corporations to abide by what the government tells them to do. And I think that's a good point that Grudem made. Yeah, we're not here advocating for Trump's character like some of these evangelicals are highlighting Biden's character. I mean, come on. Biden and character, that doesn't go together all that great. And his isn't as elevated as they might think above Donald Trump. But even so, what Grudem says, you got to know the difference between a leader's personal example that may be rejected and consider what laws would compel obedience. And I feel like Trump has done a great job in removing regulations and want to see that continue.
Yeah, I think so to some extent. But for me, it's not just about his personality. I think it's a lot of his policy and a lot of what he hasn't delivered that he's talked up on. The Heritage Foundation put out a neat study in terms of the funding and the number of abortions that Planned Parenthood has performed, and it's gone up significantly under Trump's administration. But that's not, it is Trump's fault, but here's how it happens. It's bipartisan cooperation on giant spending bills, where the Republicans say, I'm pro-life, but I'm also pro-Pentagon, and I'm also pro, raises for congressmen. So it's a give and take, and this is what bipartisanship gives you, is a giant omnibus spending bill with these compromises in it. And of course, Trump is the last man. He's the gatekeeper. And I'm sure he didn't read it all, but someone may have or should have told him that, hey, this includes increase in funding for Planned Parenthood, just so you know that. Whether he knew it or not, he signed the bill, which led to more money out of our pockets into their coffers and more deaths of unborn babies. So
See, that's why I really can't fault libertarians so much, because they do have a strong pro-choice element in that party. But I feel like they would remove the spending you're talking about.
Yeah, and there is a growing pro-life force in that party. The Mises Caucus, after Ludwig von Mises. These are folks like Tom Woods, who is an understudy of Ron Paul. I don't know if you've ever read Lawrence Vance, Lou Rockwell. These are all guys that are in that movement, and they extend those personal liberties not just to people outside of the womb, but all the way through, from conception to death. And the fact that it's not right for the government to collect your wealth and spend it on all these things, especially things like abortion and like overseas wars and aid to countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, who we should really have nothing to do with.
I totally agree with you there to return to a foreign policy that our first president would discuss, take care of our own, think about our own borders, and stay away from getting involved in other people's affairs in nations across the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to need a strong intelligence, and that's
Yep.
one thing that I think I would keep with a limited government, and hopefully find a way to fund that through sales tax or sin tax or something more voluntary that could go out there and just keep an eye on the rest of the world, but not necessarily poke the hornet's nest or go over there and actively get involved in somebody else's fight.
And I really have too problem with military bases being placed in a country like Iraq.
Yeah.
What for? But anyway, Gruden also said, in response to John Piper, political policies are not, in general, more important than personal character, but they are a primary factor to consider. So policies are important. I know there's the issue of personal character, but it gave a perspective in regards to a response to what John Piper was saying, in that Trump's character is so bad we cannot elect him as president. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I see that. I just think that no matter who it is, Trump or the Democratic nominee, they all want the power, and they all, like I said, they all want to be the one standing on top of that idol. I think our party is the only one that wants to break that idol down. Like, we don't want to stand on it. And a friend of mine shared a verse today, and just happened to come right before I left. Judges 8, the story of Gideon after he defeated the Midianites, and the Israeli leader said, "We want you to lead us. We want you to rule over us." He said, "I'm not going to rule over you. My son's not going to rule over you. The Lord's going to rule over you." But he also followed up, or someone in the comments posted the middle of Judges 9, where the different trees are trying basically to convince each other of, oh, the fig tree, you should lead us. Oh, the olive tree, you should lead us. And they all declined until it got down to the brambles.
Oh, interesting.
So I thought that was poignant to our political scene. I mean, that's the one thing that keeps me with the liberty movement, is that we don't want to rule over anybody. We want people to hopefully let the Lord rule over them, or at least give them the choice to do that. Hopefully they decide to do that. If they don't, hopefully they lead their sinful lives without harming anyone else. When they cross that line, that's when whoever bears the sword brings the hammer down or gets the millstones out.
Right. One other point that Gruden said, he said, Christians who support Trump do not encourage imitation of his flaws. And I think that was a very good point to make, because as we will pull the lever for him, we are also saying he needs to clean up his act when it comes to what he tweets and the kind of language that he will use from time to time. And one other thing he mentioned, and I would agree with him, I have a more positive evaluation of Trump's character than John Piper does. I mean, Trump has admitted to affairs and, wrecked marriages. But I look at him conducting himself now as president, and he's representative of what a man should be like to his wife as he's been in the presidency. So I would agree with Gruden on that point. Any comment about those last 2 points that?
Yeah, I mean, I
Piper
hope
made?
so. I would like to see, Christian Republicans hold Trump's feet to the fire a little bit more than they have. For the 4 years that he's been there, I've seen a little bit of improvement in his character, but I don't think we should be afraid as Christians, regardless of if we're Trump supporters or not, to call him out when he is acting unkind or of poor character.
Yeah. And I know a group of us pastors one time said he just needs somebody to speak into his life. And we don't know if that would be Mike Pence or
I was
somebody
hoping
there.
it would be Pence, because Pence is a good Christian and a
Yeah.
good man, a high character, it seems like.
And it's interesting. David Kupelian wrote an article for WorldNet Daily saying it's more than just voting for the president. Think about who you're going to put in as vice president. I definitely want Pence above Harris any day.
Yeah.
Pence, I think, is a quality individual and a saved person, Christian. And then not only that, but all the appointments as well that will go into that executive branch. Though I think we could do without 3/4 of it. Still, there is appointments there that will be significant. So with that said, this is our edition for the Sophie Scholl Society before you go to the ballot box on Tuesday. Glad you were with us here on this edition of Sophie Scholl.